We have gotten up as far as Genesis chapter 3. And beginning in verse 1, it says, "Now the serpent was more crafty than any beast of the field which the Lord God had made. And he said to the woman, Indeed, has God said, You shall not eat from any tree of the garden? The woman said to the serpent, From the fruit of the trees of the garden we may eat, but from the fruit of the tree which is in the middle of the garden, God has said, You shall not eat from it or touch it, lest you die." Let's stop right there. Now, quite frequently, we notice that various translations of the Bible use the word serpent. Yes, a serpent and a snake are essentially the same thing, but apparently, and we kind of come to this conclusion more by what the Bible says later than what it says at this point, but apparently the serpent was created, apparently a fairly intelligent and remarkable animal, more so than the others. Now, the fact that the devil talked to Eve through this serpent, I've heard people say anything from, well, this has got to be a total myth, and that this can't be a real story because we know snakes don't talk. Well, sure they don't, but then again, when you read the story of Balaam, whenever he was trying to curse the Israelites, the donkey that he was riding on, three times, skin his leg up on the side of the bridge trying to cross a creek until the donkey turned around and talked to him. So we see miraculous events where, animals have spoken. Also, the other reason that I don't think that it would have surprised Eve at this point was we figured Eve is brand new in this garden. Everything would have been new to her. The fact that one animal out of the lot might have spoken to her, I don't think would have been any big shock to her because she's encountering new stuff every single day. I don't think the fact that the serpent spoke in any way lessens the validity and accuracy of this story. I think those that try to claim this is some myth are themselves misinformed.
Did she expand the prohibition?
We're going to get to that.
Okay.
I have not overlooked that. We are going to get to it. Also refers to this serpent as crafty, or some translations will say subtle. I think the point, and I looked up that particular word in Hebrew, and I think it means that he's just different in the sense that he wasn't your ordinary animal, but that apparently God created the serpent in a way that, well, he was a cut above some of the others. I don't think that, looking back on this in hindsight, we want to look at the term crafty in a negative sense. It's like, oh, he was sneaky. But keeping in mind the serpent, as God had created it, had nothing to do with Satan. It's, we don't see the situation where the serpent begins to speak until the devil basically inhabited or possessed this serpent's body. Now, we do have other examples in Scripture of, demons possessing animals. Anybody think of any particular?
Pigs.
The pigs. There you go. There we go. The whole horde of demons that Jesus cast out that asked could they, possess the swine, and Jesus gave them permission, and they did that. So we know that demons can, in fact, possess animals. And if the demons can do it, I think it's a pretty good bet the devil himself could have done it here. But yes, when the serpent spoke, it wasn't the serpent himself doing the speaking, because we know for that matter that what kind of tongue does a snake have? Yeah, a snake can't speak with a tongue. Forked tongue. So, and that's where that phrase comes from. So either one of two things. Either the devil spoke miraculously, which again, he's got the ability to do, or the serpent was different before the fall of humanity, or could be even both. Now, the other thing I was going to mention as to how this serpent may have appeared or what he looked like at the time, the fact that when God cursed the serpent, he told him from that point on he would be crawling on his belly. Well, if the serpent was already crawling on his belly, where would the curse be in that? What does that tell us about how God created it?
Serpent had legs.
Serpent had legs. And in fact, there have been some species, I don't remember specifically which one, maybe some of you do, but there have been certain species of snakes that have been found to have within their bodies, on their skeleton, little tiny vestiges of what looked like might have been legs at some point, although they don't have legs anymore. The third thing that God said about them was that they'd eat dust, which we'll dig more into that as we get into it. So we don't know what the serpent ate at this particular point, but of course God told the animals at this point before the fall that all of them would eat the greenery of the field. So we can assume the serpent was a vegetarian, probably could walk, may or may not have been able to talk. All depends on whether the devil did this miraculously or not. But it says he was craftier than any beast of the field which the Lord God had made. And he said to the woman, indeed, notice how he presents this. He does not ask Eve, are there any prohibitions on what you're supposed to do or whatever? He misstates what God's rule was. He says, indeed, has God said, you shall not eat from any tree of the garden? Well, first off, we know God didn't say that. The second thing, the way he presented it, what's the devil implying in this? Well, one of two, or possibly two things. That God's either a liar, or he's saying God's a despot. God won't let you eat anything. That's what he's implying here, although God didn't say that. But he's presenting it to Eve like, well, did God really say that? That you couldn't eat of any fruit of the garden? Then the woman says, verse 3, that God has said you shall not eat from it or touch it lest you die. Now, as Merrill mentioned earlier, yes, God did not say that you can't touch it. God said, don't eat of the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and that's it. That was the only prohibition. As far as we know from what God said, they can go climb on that tree, they can look at it, they can touch it, as long as they don't eat it. So why do you think Eve added this additional prohibition that God did not say? I can give you two possibilities.
She got it secondhand from Adam.
There you go. That's the first possibility right there. Is God told Adam not to eat of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. We have no knowledge anywhere in the Bible that God spoke this prohibition directly to Eve. Adam may have passed that rule on to Eve and said, don't touch that tree over there. Don't eat it. Just stay away from it. Don't touch it. In the same sense that, again, I've used this illustration before talking about a hot stove top with a 3-year-old. If you tell, what is better to tell the 3-year-old or the 4-year-old, don't stick your hand in the boiling water, or what? Just don't touch the stove.
Stay away from the stove.
Stay away from the stove. If Merrill is my brother, let's say Merrill's my big brother, and Mama tells Merrill, don't you go near that stove over there. That stove is hot. Now, make sure when your brother comes in that he knows. What's Merrill probably going to do? He's going to say, Mama said don't touch the stove.
Exactly.
Yeah, is that an incorrect way of passing it on? Or is he just giving me his interpretation?
His interpretation.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with that. And that may have been exactly what Adam did. Adam may have passed that prohibition on to his wife and just said, God said, don't, just don't touch that tree over there. We need to stay away from that one. And that may have been what she was saying. She's not adding necessarily. And again, even if Adam relayed the prohibition correctly, in Eve's mind, if she wants to make sure she doesn't make the mistake of eating of that tree, what would she naturally tell herself to do?
Don't touch it.
Don't touch it. Just stay away from that tree. So, adding to what God said in this particular case is not in and of itself a bad thing. Now, we know that Jesus consistently condemned the Pharisees because they took God's rules and regulations and expanded them to the point that they were ridiculous and impossible to follow. They took it to the extreme. Eve didn't do that here. Did she add to it? Yes. But is it an extreme situation, or did she just interpret what it meant to her? Sure. Now, she started saying, well, God said that we need to maintain a 50-foot corridor around the tree and to make sure that we don't go there and that we don't throw anything at the tree, and if you pass the 50-foot corridor that we'll be arrested. That would have been wrong. And that's what the Pharisees did. Verse 4. Now we get to the point where the devil directly contradicts God. And the serpent said to the woman, you surely shall not die. For God knows that in the day you eat from it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. Now, here the devil tells what essentially is a half-truth, which is one of his favorite things to do. Oftentimes the devil does not lie outright. He withholds part of the truth so that it comes out not what was intended. God said, in the day you eat of that, you'll die. So number one, the devil directly contradicts God and says, no, you're not going to die. And if you're going to contradict God, what are you essentially doing there? You're calling God a liar. Exactly. Second thing is that God's being unfair. Because God knows that when you eat that, you'll be like Him. So God is being unfair in that God's got
holding
something.
you back.
God's holding you back. God's got something that you should rightfully have, and He's holding you back. And when you eat that, you'll know good and evil like God. This is the half-truth that He told. Would they know good and evil? Yes. But the problem is they already knew good, and they didn't need to know the evil because, well, what is evil? Evil is the complete absence of good. It is a rebellion against God. As long as they were sinless, they didn't know any evil, and they should have stayed that way. The devil is basically telling Eve that if you eat of this, you'll know things that God doesn't want you to know, and you'll be like Him. So did she know good and evil? Yeah, but the problem was when that realization came to her, it turned out to be not a good thing like the devil convinced her that it was.
Yeah, knowing evil's worked out real well for us.
Yeah. We know good and evil, and we choose the evil instead. So, at one point he calls God a liar, he contradicts God, and then he convinces Eve with a half-truth that what God had told her wasn't entirely correct. So that really you could look at it and say Satan called God a liar twice here. And that he was jealous. Verse 6. When the woman saw that the tree was good for food, and that it was a delight to the eyes, and that the tree was desirable to make one wise, she took from its fruit and ate, and she gave also to her husband with her, and he ate. Verse 6 has been one of the most controversial verses in the Bible for years. Number one, when the devil was having this conversation with Eve, now Eve said, we can't touch it. Well, if she's close enough that she can see that it's got good fruit, and that fruit might be good. The question we have to ask is, was she close enough to the tree to get a good look at it, but not touching it? Or did the devil say, why don't we just kind of slither over there and look at it and see what, Was she over here and the devil convinced her to walk over to the tree? Or did this conversation take place in the vicinity of the tree? That's a question we won't know. But here's the big controversy. Where was Adam? Based upon the way the Hebrew reads, as we get later when it says that she gave to her husband with her, the words that are used there are unfortunately ambiguous. In some sense, it can be interpreted that Adam was over there somewhere, and during this conversation, Adam walks up, and now he's with her. Others believe that Adam may have been privy to this entire conversation and was there with her the entire time, but the devil addresses her. And that actually is the one that has the strongest linguistic evidence to it, because each time in the original Hebrew, when it's taught, when the devil says, "You surely shall not die," and back in verse 1 where it says, "You shall not eat from any tree of the garden," in Hebrew there's a singular you and a plural you. Each time the devil used the plural you. It's hard for us to see that in English because our singular you has dropped out of the English language. We only have one word which stands for both plural and singular. Not so in Hebrew. Each time the devil said, "You won't die, you will know good and evil, you this, you that," the devil always used a plural you, which would indicate that in all probability, Adam was privy to this conversation. It's just that the devil addressed Eve directly and kind of ignored Adam. Which, if that's true, then the question would be, we start talking about, well, what was the first sin? By the way, when we look at this and it says Eve ate of this, what is the first sin that we see here in the Bible?
They lied about Christ.
Well, the devil did, but I'm talking about with Adam and Eve. What was the first sin in the human race? That could be construed as that.
They believed the devil and not God.
There you go. The issue was not that Eve ate of the fruit. By the time Eve ate of this fruit, she had already sinned. And I can give you two of them. Bruce just mentioned one, the fact that they were willing to believe the devil instead of God. So doubt came into Eve's mind. The second thing Eve did is, remember what Jesus said about adultery? He said that
She desired the fruit.
Yeah.
It became desirable to her.
She lusted after the fruit before she ever even picked it and ate it.
I was wondering about that whole passage there, because did the tree suddenly become desirable to her after that Satan planted that seed in her mind? Because prior to that, it hadn't been desirable to her.
Which
apparently.
makes us wonder if what Bruce just said is in fact the situation, that when she began to listen to and believe the devil and not God, sin had entered her heart right then. And at that point, now she looks at that tree with a whole different perspective. And now, yes, it has become desirable. So eating of the fruit was not the first sin that humanity committed. It was one of those two, the desire, and I'm kind of with Bruce on this one. I think her listening to the devil, that was the first mistake she made right there. Now, in all of this, we don't know where Adam is, but again, according to the Hebrew language, it seems if Adam wasn't right there listening, Adam was awfully close by. Because at this point, she eats of the fruit, and she doesn't say, "Hey, Adam, come over here." It says she handed the fruit to him, and he ate. Now, I have heard over the years, and I've even struggled with this one myself, is this some great love story that Adam realizing that Eve has just rebelled against God, and that at this point figures whatever fate is going to befall her, she's my wife and I'm not going to let her, go this on her own. I'm going to eat it too and go down with her. I've heard that multiple times. But if that's true, I don't think it is true, but let's assume for the sake of argument it is true. If that's so, then Adam would have sinned right there in the sin of idolatry. Where would the sin of idolatry be in Adam's heart if that story were true?
He placed Eve above God.
There you go, right there. Because if it's true that Adam loved his wife enough that he was willing to place her before God, that was idolatry, and Adam had now sinned. Now, that again, that's a theory that some people have. Excuse me. I don't think it's necessarily true. I think that Adam at this point, while Eve, clearly we're told later, we hadn't gotten that far, that Eve definitely was deceived and Adam went in with his eyes wide open. I don't think it's true that Adam loved his wife so much that he was willing to take the fall with her, because what's the first thing Adam did when God confronted him? Blamed everybody.
her.
Yeah, blamed her.
Do it.
First off, he said, she did it,
She did it.
and you gave her to me, so it's your fault, God. So no, I don't think it's a great love story. I don't think that has, again, you probably will read that from time to time. I don't buy it at all. I think that while he had his eyes wide open, as soon as Eve ate of that fruit and she's decided it's good, I think Adam decided in his own mind, okay, well, I guess I'll eat it too. I don't think he did it for her. I think he just plain decided that that was the choice he was going to make.
I was the last. God made Adam later the spiritual leader, obviously. But is this why? Maybe because he didn't stand up for God and basically said, because God told him and he told Eve. I don't think Eve knew any other way.
Keep in mind, Adam was the spiritual leader of their home before they sinned.
Right.
Because-
he was still considered.
So that would have
Yeah.
nothing to do with this.
Yeah.
Adam was already the spiritual leader.
Right, and that's why I had a hard time. He didn't discipline her, and explain to her. And I told you what God told me. Just because He didn't tell you, you got to trust me.
Mm-hmm.
Stepped in.
The degree of deceit that Satan succeeds in pulling off here is also emphasized in 6. Was desirable to make one wise.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I don't think.
What kind of wisdom?
Yeah, what wisdom did we achieve by sinning against God?
Uh-huh. We know good and evil now. Now, here's the other sin in this that you may not have caught. Who, up until this point, decides what good and evil is? Or are, I should say. Whose decision is good versus evil?
God.
God's decision. But now, if the devil convinces Eve, and then by corollary, consequence there, Adam as well, that if they eat of this, they will know good and evil. The other issue of idolatry that both of them are involved in is that, well, we get to be like God because now what's good and evil, we decide. Not just God. I get to decide what's good and what's evil. And that has been the problem
We've
with...
been doing a great job of that ever since.
Yeah, I would say that's the big problem with humanity ever since then, is we want to decide what's good and what's evil. Twice in the history of Israel, when Israel had no king, what did it say that, when they began to go down, down the drain morally, what was the problem?
You don't need a king.
Well, it said every man did what was right in his own eyes. He decided what's right and what's wrong. What's going on in the world today? We have decided ourselves what's right and what's wrong. And in fact, in fulfillment of prophecy, in our world today, we've declared that that which is good is evil, and evil is what's good. We've decided what's right in our own eyes. We've been making this same sin ever since then.
Didn't God already tell us that would happen?
Uh-huh. Yep. So that, and I guess the big picture in all of this is we think of, the first sin, they ate of the fruit. There was a whole laundry list of sins that they committed that one right after another. And the first sin, which again, as Bruce mentioned, was they began to doubt God and listen to the devil. And after that, it was just one after another. And that's the big thing we see in sin ever since then. There's no such thing. There's sins are like Lay's potato chips. There's no such thing as just one. You have one, there's going to be a whole lot more following right after it.
Floodgates.